Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Stryd webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about Stryd trends in this latest software release. As always, my name is Evan, your host of the show. Let's get into it. If you're watching live right now on YouTube, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the Stryd YouTube channel to stay up to date on great webinar releases like this. If you're also watching live, you can send any questions or comments in the chat section, and producer Kaylee will send them my way to answer at the end of the show. You can also watch our videos, the webinars on our Facebook community and the Stryd community on Facebook if you would like to do so. But please feel free to give the stream a like. It helps us out a lot. So we're going to be talking about trends. This is part of this latest software release. Where do you find trends? Well, you can open up your Stryd mobile app, click on Calendar, and press the Trend button in the top right corner. This is only currently available on the iOS platform. Will be making its way to Android soon. All of these screenshots are going to be from the iOS app, so that's what we're going to be talking through. Again, you can open your Stryd mobile app on iOS, click Calendar, and then press the Trend button in the top right corner to go into the Trend view. Metric trends, we're going to talk about a couple different types of trends, and then we're going to get into a couple specific examples of my actual data, which I think is very fun to talk through. So metric trends help visualize your metrics over time. It offers you quick access to track improvement and see how your running is going. The different metrics that we can sort and look at our trends are power, training load, distance, duration, pace, ground contact time, vertical oscillation, heart rate, and leg spring stiffness. Those are all the different selections, and we'll go through specific examples of all of these. The other thing that I would say you should always notice in the mobile app or on Power Center, if you noticed one of these circles with the blue eye in the middle of it, that is a information card. Our support team and our software team has worked tirelessly to not only put these great features out, but give you some great knowledge about these features as well. So if you're ever curious about a feature, how it works, you can always press that little icon for more information. The next trends we're going to take a look at that are default in the trend setting on your Stryd mobile app are feel and perceived effort trends. We recommend using both of these for the best interpretation of your data. They default to a 90-day visualization, which points out what might be considered as normal efforts or outliers. And by that, I mean looking at a specific sort of horizontal line. We can notice here on the feel trend that the default middle feel, just by feeling like pretty okay, is this kind of middle green color. We can notice any outliers like a dark red poor feeling or a great feeling. So this is really something to pay attention to and see if there are any outliers that don't follow a normal trend. And we can also use the perceived effort trend to see any sort of activities that might have been clustered around each other. So they're best used together to identify specific time periods of stress. If we have a very hard effort ranking in the 8, 9, or 10 area, we might want to look out for the next couple days if we feel poor in that yellow-orange area or bad in that red area. So these are best used combined for the best possible interpretation of this information. Time and zones. How does your training distribution look? This should be something similar. You should feel pretty comfortable looking at this if you've looked at the insight cards at all in the post-run screen. Defaults to a 90-day zone distribution. It'll default to summarize all of your runs in the last 90 days. And you can press and scroll to view more detail. This is something that we talked about over the past couple days. A lot of these graphs specifically do have features where if you press and hold on the screen, you can scroll back and forth and get a little bit more specific information here. So we might notice specifically here in the time and zones, zone 1 accounts for about 80%, but if we actually press and hold on it, we can see duration, we can see a more specific percentage as well. Filtering trends. This is going to give you expert level control, and this is probably the most important point to know about utilizing trends and looking in the app and using trends for the best benefit that you possibly can, knowing how to filter. So like we mentioned, when you press that top right corner and you turn on the default trend view, it'll give you a general overview of metrics over a 90-day period. And again, you can press and scroll on the chart to view individual runs. The thing that you should know, though, is the top left corner turns on filtering. So if you press that button in the top left corner, it'll activate filters. And the default filter is going to be active days, which are days that have a run associated with them in the past, or days where you have a event in the future or a workout. So these are going to be what we call active days, and this is the default. You can get a little bit more into detail by actually clicking on that section that says filter by and going into the filtering menu. So what we're going to do in the filtering menu, we can choose from preset filters like active days, like I mentioned how it defaults to, easy and recovery runs, favorite runs, long runs, and races and time trials. These are going to be the 5 defaults. And this is possible by you tagging your runs. Like we mentioned before, if you go to the calendar section and press the little tag icon, you'll be able to assign a run type. Again, feel, perceived effort. You'll be able to tag your run with different information, and that gives us the most information about you. So the default filters, like I mentioned, are active days, easy and recovery runs, favorites, long runs, and races and time trials. For this specific example, we're going to press long runs, and we're going to take a look at some specific data. This is my own data, and we're going to see how it looks on the filter and the trend option. So analyzing long run trends. First, we're going to talk about power. We're going to go from the left side to the right side of all these metrics and see if we can notice anything, see if we can pick out any outliers, maybe explain why. So when we start with power, we have this scatter plot of different runs that I have tagged as a long run. We'll see the x-axis on the bottom is showing the months of the year, and this is going to go back 90 days. And the y-axis is going to show us the average watts for that long run specifically. So we can see I'm slightly trending up, maybe from about 255, 256 average watts to about 262 average watts is what that trend line is showing. But I have a smattering and a scattering of all these different data points here. The trend line is showing just the general trend and direction that I'm moving into. If I look back at early September and I see this this specific activity that's a little bit below 230, I might notice that's an outlier, and I might want to press and hold on the screen, and I want to view that run to remind myself what that specifically was. Alternatively, I might want to look at the long run I did about 2 weeks ago. That's just under 280 watts average, but I might want to look at that a little bit closer because that is a little bit of an outlier offside of the trend line. So the power will display, again, average watts, and it will give you the ability to look at each run as sort of a general overview. And it gives me a little bit more information when I say, what was the long run that I did 2 weeks ago? What was the route that I ran? Maybe I want to use that as sort of a benchmark. And 2 weeks from now, I can actually go out and try and do it again. But the main thing we're shown here is that positive trend line for power. Let's take a look at stress. We'll also notice, again, that same long run, that was much, much more stressful than my typical long run is. It was at 130 RSS, 130 running stress score. And that is quite an outlier, especially if you consider some of my long runs were between 80 and 90 for some of the past couple weeks. But we can see that stress is also trending in the positive direction. Maybe if I'm looking at this specific stress chart as well, I want to keep in mind looking at my running stress balance. I want to keep in mind looking at my specific recovery days the day after a long run and make sure that I'm using that recovery gauge insight, make sure that I'm staying below my 42-day cumulative stress. So we're starting to tie in all of these different features in this software release. But these are the things that I notice when I'm looking at the specific trends here, especially with stress. I'm saying if I have a really high stress activity, how much more stressful is it than my typical? I can see that it's offset from my trend by quite a bit. So I might use this specific graph here on the trend side to make sure that my recovery runs the day after a long run for the next couple of weeks are indeed below that 42-day average stress. The next one's going to be distance, and this is something that I find pretty useful to, again, notice the variety in some of these long runs. So we can see early on, kind of in August here, that I was running somewhere between 16.8 and 17 miles, right about 17 miles for each long run. I had a couple that were down, a couple that were up, a couple that were down, and now I've gone back to running a little bit higher. So I am trending positively for the distance. And again, this same sort of relationship. I want to identify, okay, are any of these an outlier? Did I run, for a really short distance comparatively? Did I run for a lot longer distance? This trend helps plot these over time and helps me understand this a little bit more fully. The next one's going to be duration, and this one's actually kind of interesting as well. If I am training specifically for a time on feet race, I want to make sure that my duration is increasing through my training cycle. I want to look for any runs that will tie this in with the next metric that we're looking at, the pace trend. But I want to look at my duration. I want to look at my pace and see if they follow any sort of similar thing. So we can see my duration overall is trending a little bit down, and my pace is actually trending a little bit faster. So I'm running pretty similar routes for most of these long runs too, and so I can keep the power and pace relationship in mind, but I am trending slightly faster for some of these long runs. Now we're going to get into some of these more quote-unquote advanced metrics. The ground contact time is the first one we're going to take a look at here, and we can see that I'm actually trending down slightly in terms of my ground contact time. I have one outlier that's a little bit above 250, about 255 milliseconds, and that's above the average trend. The trend is going from a little bit over 230 down to about 220, and so maybe I want to take a look at that run a little bit closer if I notice an outlier like that. See, was I running on any trails? Was I running mostly uphill for that run? Alternatively, the same sort of thing. Maybe I normally run trails. My ground contact time is a little bit higher, and maybe I do a faster downhill road run, and I notice that my ground contact time actually went down a little bit, or I'm running a little bit more flat. So utilizing this, comparing like activities, is a great thing to do. Vertical oscillation, we can draw the same conclusions here. We can say, oh, my vertical oscillation is actually trending up a little bit. Why is that? Maybe I'm adding a little bit more intensity and I'm having to run faster. My pace is trending up, and so my vertical oscillation, to increase my pace, maybe I'm increasing my vertical oscillation. Maybe I changed a certain type of shoe, or I changed my route. Again, if I'm running mostly hilly routes, my vertical oscillation will come down a little bit, and maybe I'm running a little bit more flat or a little bit more downhill. So we can start to, again, draw these relationships based on any one of these specific trend charts. The next one is going to be heart rate. And again, this is going to be dependent on the device that you are using. So for me, we can see that I'm, pretty smack dab in the middle of 140 to 150 beats per minute. I do have one outlier that was 170, but I believe that was from my watch not necessarily being correct, the optical heart rate not being correct on that run. So I can maybe pick out that and say, oh, it wasn't necessarily like super intense, and it wasn't that hard of a long run. So I can sort of identify these sort of trends as well. But I typically fit, we can see that trend line, usually between 140 to 150 for my heart rate from whatever method I'm using to collect it. And the last one here is leg spring stiffness. And this one is actually super interesting to me. We talk about this a lot, but I actually did make a cognizant shoe choice switch for my long runs at the beginning of September. So we can see the last about 6 runs, they're all trending up. If we take a look at this cluster from the middle of July through the middle of August, we can see it kind of oscillates between about 9.1 to 9.4, but really stays in there. And then ever since I switched shoes, I'm wearing a marathon specific shoe for some of these long runs to get used to running longer distances in this specific type of shoe. We can see that I pretty much had a level shift of my leg spring stiffness in this specific shoe, and I'm going between 9.7 and about 10.21 for my leg spring stiffness on average. So we can see this pretty clear positive trend And if I want to, I can actually go in a little bit more detail for this too. So if I want to see my specific trends in a specific type of shoe, I can add that in as one of the filters as well. So a lot of information that you can add on here, specifically if you say, actually, we'll talk about it right now, trying other filters and creating your own. You'll press that filter button again. You can scroll all the way down to create new filter, and you can customize the filters and save them as you create these new filters. So one of the filters that I made was tempo runs, thresholds between 5 to 10 miles. I want to check in on these as I maybe add some more longer tempo efforts or threshold efforts into my training. I might also want to add specific types of shoes. So if I'm comparing two different types of shoes on different easy days over a whole training block, maybe I want to identify that relationship and see if there are any meaningful differences. I want to maybe tag a surface type, or I want to look at all my treadmill runs as we get closer in the Northern Hemisphere here to running more indoors. So these are sort of things with the filters that are one of the most powerful parts of this release. Coupling filters that we already had on the calendar page with trends gives you more information about the specific things that you care about and are specific to you in your training. So remember to go to the calendar page, press the top right button, and then press the top left button. You'll enable filters on your trends, and you'll be able to create custom filters that provide you with the most information possible about what you care about. And that was one of my really favorite things in this release, is being able to add a filter on top of a trend. That's very, very, very powerful information. So we're going to talk about 3 takeaways. So takeaway 1, check trends for each metric. Take time to look through each one, because as we can see from my explanation, just from a pretty quick summary of all my long run trends, we can see some specific points that I can pick out for each one of these metrics. So take the time to look through each of these specific metrics when you check your trends. Takeaway number 2 is use feel and perceived exertion together. They're more valuable together than alone. Keep in mind looking out for things that you rated in the 7, 8, 9, 10, and then look for a couple days later, see if you notice any specific ratings of feel, and see if you felt really poor, see if you felt in that red or orange sort of zone there. They're more valuable together than alone for the feel and perceived exertion. Takeaway number 3 is to filter runs for specificity. The filter button is your best friend. Again, one of the coolest things in this release is using the filter button on top of trends, creating a custom data set that you want to analyze over time. You can save that data set, and so you can keep coming back to it and see, as you keep adding more runs to it, how you are trending over time. Do want to plug Stryd really quick. You can go to store.stryd.com to purchase today if you haven't already. And this is part of our feature release that is available now. This was, this is our Thursday webinar. We have one more coming up tomorrow that I'll talk about in a little bit. But this is part of this series that we've been doing in terms of webinars over the past 2 weeks or so, covering a bunch of different specific feature sets out of this webinar. But this is available now. Like I mentioned, the trends are specifically on iOS right now, and they'll be making their way to Android in the near future, and we're really excited to add that feature to the Android platform. I'll switch it back now and see if we have any questions whatsoever. Number 1 question here is, if my CP updates during a training plan, does the plan auto update as well? Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the plan, the native Stryd training plans will update based on your auto calculated critical power, and it'll adjust with your fitness over time. So yeah, great question. And I also do want to always plug some of the webinars that we've recorded in the past on establishing and maintaining a valid auto-calculated critical power. James says, first Stryd run tonight. Have a great run, James. Thanks for tuning in. And last question we have here is, what are the benefits of tracking your stress over time? Yeah, this is Fantastic, fantastic question. And actually, there's a couple different ways to do it. So when we look at stress in the Stryd ecosystem, we look at what we call running stress score. And running stress score takes your second by second power output compared to your critical power, and it will take that over the duration of the run and assign it a point value. When you take that point value and you compare it not only to that individual runs of similar types, you can compare it with the average, weighted average over a 7-day period, and then a weighted average over a 42-day period. You take the difference between those, and you can look at your running stress balance. That's something that's pretty critical in terms of maintaining training load and making sure you're not pushing too hard in what we call an acute or short term, that 7-day weighted average, versus a more chronic or long term 42-day average. So you can see the relationship between the running stress that you're adding. You can also specifically look at the impact of different types of runs. So if I have a hour run where I run at 90% of my critical power, but then I do a 2-hour run at a relatively low intensity, I can see the relationship between those. I can compare different types of efforts and have this one unique metric, running stress score, as a thing that I always fall back to, especially for things, again, like we compare similar variables. So if I'm tracking my stress over time for my long runs, I can have an idea of how stressful a certain type of long run might be, a certain intensity long run might be. And so when we add training stress, instead of just focusing on things like mileage or just things like average pace, or just things like average heart rate, that stress gives us a little bit more information and is specific to the Stryd ecosystem. So great question there. The next topic we're going to be talking about tomorrow is training A to Z. So we're going to be talking about creating a power-based workout in a third-party system, having it come onto the Stryd Apple Watch app, running that workout, and we're going to talk about analysis from that workout as well. So we're going all the way from A to Z. We're going through the full new Stryd experience. We're going to be taking a look at pretty much every facet of this release in conjunction to a practical training application. So I'm excited to talk about that tomorrow. We'll be back here on our YouTube channel, and please remember to like the stream and subscribe, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Have a great one.